Welcome back to Previously Prohibited. I'm Jenin Younes, here with my co-host Melissa Whitty, and we are beyond thrilled to have Michael Tracey here to talk about the Jeffrey Epstein case. He and Mel kind of got into it on Twitter a little bit. They have some strong disagreements about how to interpret sort of the evidence and various legal actions that took place. So we figured we'd just have a discussion so they can hash it out here. And I'm going to kind of try to moderate a little bit, but I'm not going to officially play that role, especially since I'm not unbiased. I tend to, I don't know as much as either of them, but I tend to lean a little bit more towards Mel's side on this. So, but I'll try to do what I can. So with all that, why don't you each sort of lay out your positions in, maybe 3 minutes?
Okay, you can go, Mike. Yep.
Well, I mean, we only got into it in that I happened to see that she was like posting screenshots of the fact that I happened to go on the Ben Shapiro show last week. And so I guess my question was, should I refuse invitations to appear on shows with people with whom I have other disagreements and even don't fully agree with on the Epstein matter, but nonetheless, it could be worth having an exchange. And the allegation seemed to be made by her, Mel, that I was cynically maneuvering and going through some kind of contrived ideological epiphany so that I could achieve my ultimate goal, which is to become a toady of Barry Weiss. And this claim was based on the fact that I accepted an invitation to appear on Ben Shapiro's show, and that I have done semi-regular podcasts or streams with this guy Richard Hanani going back years, well predating Epstein. And so I just don't know what the basis is for that imputation of motive. Like, I've done whatever debates people want to have me on over this issue. I was on a hugely contentious Breaking Points debate for almost an hour where the entire comment section is up in arms against me. I mean, everybody on the internet hates me constantly over this issue. So this idea that it would just be some cynical ploy for career advancement is silly, much less that it's some ideological ploy to somehow get in the good graces of Barry Weiss, which I don't even know what her view is on this issue, really, but whatever it may be, it has nothing to do with what I'm motivated by. So that's the only that's what brought about my thought that I should respond to that allegation.
Well, so
separate and apart from the substance of the matter where we might disagree.
Before Mel gets into hers, I was just going to briefly comment that as far as Barry Weiss goes, I think the general idea is that, coming down on the side that, Epstein ran this blackmail ring and was working for Mossad tends to be the, associated with the anti-Israel position, whereas trying to deny the crimes as associated with the pro-Israel position. I understand that you would probably take issue with that characterization, but I think that's likely where that was coming from.
Perhaps. I mean, I happen to also think, and we can maybe get into this, and sorry, I'll stop and let Mel give her thoughts, but I happen to think also that the obsession with people who are critical of Israel to frame the nature of the U.S.-Israeli relationship almost exclusively now through this kind of fervid lens of some ever-present sexual blackmail is an extreme misdiagnosis of the issue. And if anything, seems to me, if we want to accuse people or organizations of being limited hangouts or whatever that term is, I'm not like literally accusing anyone of that, but it seems to me that's almost like in a way in the interest of Israel to get everybody obsessed with like pedo rings and all these scandalizing, tantalizing theories that really don't have much of an ample factual basis, rather than evaluating the nature of the U.S.-Israeli relationship based on what's on the record, which I've been doing for, as long as I've been in the public arena, let's say, since, 2010. And so my impression is that this whole genre of Israel-related commentary that flows from Epstein is a gigantic distraction and in fact tends to beclown people who cling to it so religiously.
Well, I would definitely disagree with you. I would agree that perhaps in some ways people attach too much importance, or the idea that every single member of our government is somehow some kind of child predator, sexual predator that has blackmail is obviously ridiculous. But there are certain things that have happened within our government. There is a fealty that is not explained in any sort of ordinary terms, right? There is nothing to be gained from this. These people act as if they are under some sort of hypnosis or threat. It bewilders the mind, the amount of subservience that the American political class has to this tiny foreign nation, right? So I think it's only natural that you see people look for a reason for that. And so when you have this man like Jeffrey Epstein pop up, and he is this very wealthy billionaire who no one can actually seem to really ascertain where his wealth comes from. He seems to be some sort of wealth manager, but he doesn't actually have any credentials. From what I understand, doesn't have a strong record of actually producing wealth for others, which is where we would think he would get this wealth from. And so when we see somebody like that pop up, he's got strong ties to, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father was an Israeli super spy. Yeah, people connect the dots, and I don't think that we should get angry with them, number one. I think that we should acknowledge that there are some really shady things that happened here. But I found your post very interesting because, number one, you kind of, you're really hard, you kind of knock people down, insult them, kind of basically imply, and you're not the only one who has been doing this. Hanania also, basically, you're an idiot if you think that Epstein was anything other than apparently just some dude that liked to sleep with teenagers.
Well, I don't think that's what I said in the piece. Like, who did I slam real hard in the piece in particular?
Well, no, it's in the overall tone of your criticism. I think you even, in your latest thing, you wanted to go and let's just talk to ordinary people about the Epstein thing. Hold on, what is it that you characterize it as? An obsession, the summer of Epstein obsession.
I mean, I've said that I'm obsessed. I admit it. I'm obsessed with the Epstein story now, but probably from a slightly different angle than most people. So I'm not begrudging anyone for being obsessed. It's endlessly fascinating. But I think probably
you're obsessed with the obsession.
I'm obsessed with the obsession, but I'm also obsessed with like the substance of the case because of how poorly I regard it to have been portrayed, such that it has led to the creation of what I think is like a 90% unfounded popular narrative that people subscribe to.
Okay, so now we've got Unraveling the Endless Epstein Insanity.
Yeah, that's a title for a stream, I think.
Correct, but it's the insinuation here, the insane multitude of misconceptions about the Epstein case.
Yeah, it's another headline.
Quantifying the total number of court records, blah, 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 blah. The absolute enormous amount of material. Let me see. The overall essence from your tweets and whatnot is that you think basically people are dumb for this. I think that's the feeling.
People dumb. I mean, if you read the article, why don't you quote something in which I say that? I interviewed people over the weekend because I genuinely am like kind of obsessed with this story now, just in terms of its political valence. And
this is what happens.
It is insane that the House of Representatives was prematurely adjourned from its summer session because of Jeffrey Epstein in 2025. I think it's objectively insane. So I stand by the use of the word insane in various contexts in relation to this story.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think one thing that is rubbing people the wrong way is the sort of insinuation that these girls or women are making things up. And like, I'm not a huge, I'm Me Too skeptical. I got in trouble long ago for standing up for Woody Allen and saying I didn't think the allegations against him were substantial enough. But I mean, first of all, even if these girls, this was consensual arrangements, they're still teenagers, and for an older man to be preying on vulnerable girls like that is horrendous, in my opinion. And then the idea that, there might have been a couple of victims or non-victims who fabricated claims in order to get benefits, but the idea that so many did seems really implausible to me. And so I think that's part of why people have taken issue with your approach.
Well, it's not just that victims as a vague category I'm claiming have fabricated things. It's that the one central quote-unquote victim who gave rise to this whole theory that there was an elaborate child sex trafficking ring in which prominent people were supplied with minors by Epstein to capture them in compromising sexual situations and then blackmail them. That all spawns from one particular accuser, Virginia Giuffre, who filed a motion for joinder in late 2014, alleging that she had been sex trafficked as a minor to a host of prominent individuals. She specified in that filing Alan Dershowitz and Prince Andrew, but then she also claimed that she had been trafficked to like another amorphous category of people, so prime ministers, presidents, etc., and hadn't in the subsequent 10 years substantiated virtually none of it. In fact, she had to retract her allegation against Dershowitz in humiliating fashion. Now, I know people disagree, including myself, with Dershowitz on issues around Israel or other political issues that we could also discuss, but I just don't see how people struggle so much to disentangle that from whether or not this extraordinary, outrageous claim against him that was made that he always declared he would be vindicated on, and then was vindicated. I don't know why we're supposed to resist making that recognition when, beyond any reasonable argument, I think he was clearly vindicated. And it's not just on Dershowitz that this person who is central to the whole development of this theory. I'm not just like latching on to one sort of peripheral or marginal accuser who may have made something up. I'm saying that she was central to the generation of this whole, what I'm calling, at least in large part, mythology around a child sex trafficking ring and blackmail operation. She admitted, for instance, she wrote in her memoir that was under seal for a long time in litigation that her lawyers wanted to keep concealed. People say they want Epstein files. A lot of the victims' attorneys are the ones who were adamant about keeping certain files concealed for as long as they can, probably because it would be to the disadvantage of their clients for that material to come out. But eventually that manuscript that she wrote for a potential lucrative book deal that she was being shopped around for did come out. And she claimed, for instance, that she had sexual intercourse on Epstein's Island with a Harvard professor named Stephen, last name still redacted in the court records, but then was asked later at a deposition, did you have sex with this individual, the Harvard professor Stephen? And she just said no. And she makes up claim after claim after claim to a point where if you can't acknowledge that it's a pattern of serial fabulism, then I don't know how exactly to ascertain your commitment to like reasoned inquiry.
First of all, the Dershowitz thing, there was actually they had mutual lawsuits for defamation against each other. They were mutually dropped. She part of the negotiation, part of the deal was that she said that she may have made a mistake. He
may have misidentified him.
And then he in turn drops his defamation case against her. She drops her defamation case against him. I wouldn't say this very, very mild, I could have made a mistake, is some kind of grand vindication of Alan Dershowitz.
Well, of course it is. Of course it is. First of all, Giuffre sued Dershowitz for defamation first because Dershowitz claimed in public, in the media and elsewhere, that Giuffre was lying when she was accusing him of having committed depraved sexual acts against her as a minor. So Giuffre and her high-powered lawyers, David Boies with Boies Schiller, initiated a defamation lawsuit against Dershowitz. Then Dershowitz did counter-sue. And then it resulted in a settlement whereby Dershowitz didn't even seek any monetary damages.
Their cases.
Well, yeah, it resulted in a settlement whereby Dershowitz wasn't even seeking any monetary damages. What he was seeking was a joint statement where Giuffre acknowledges that she, quote, may have misidentified Dershowitz. It's all but an outright admission that this claim was a lie. Obviously, what can you infer from that statement? That the claim that had been made against Dershowitz for nearly a decade was false. Otherwise, why would they have dropped the claim?
Okay.
Oh, well, there are lots of reasons. I mean, she might not have wanted to, subject herself to discovery. Like, you can be the actual victim of a crime or a civil violation and decide you don't want to subject yourself to the discovery process. Like, actually, I've thought about suing for defamation, and I'm like, I don't want everyone going through my phone to see my texts because that could happen.
There's always already robust discovery at that point.
But see, here's the thing: by your own standard that you're using right here against Virginia Giuffre, then why would J.P. Morgan settle for $290 million if not that they were guilty for sex trafficking? and for helping to facilitate Jeffrey's sex trafficking.
But it's
Why
an
not?
entirely different circumstance. There had
No,
already
it's
been
not.
criminal. Of course it is. There had already been criminal verdicts rendered in relation to Ghislaine Maxwell. Jeffrey Epstein had already died, and his estate had already set up a victims' compensation fund
This is
for
not
anybody
his
who
estate.
could.
This is J.P. Morgan Chase, which
I know,
has a
I'm getting to
fiduciary
it.
duty to their shareholders
I'm
to
getting
not
to it.
settle fraudulent cases.
Well, the J.P. Morgan and Deutsche Bank clearly had an incentive to settle because protracted, endless litigation in which they could be accused in public and in Congress, perhaps, or in other venues of refusing to settle with this allegedly huge constellation of victims. That was obviously going to redound to their public disadvantage just from a PR perspective, and it also costs a lot of money to. It also costs. It wouldn't have redounded to their PR disadvantage in public if they could be accused of prolonging litigation against
If they go to trial and say
victims.
that no, we did not, in fact, help to facilitate sex trafficking. Yeah, I actually
Well, the
think
claims were
that
much
was
narrower than that. I mean, the claims were much narrower that the judge actually agreed were applicable to J.P. Morgan, for instance. It was mostly around like a negligence having to do with Epstein withdrawing cash, and that there should have been more due diligence done, more so than that they were like overtly facilitating sex trafficking. It was more the tort more had to do with their negligence.
The clear red flags that are established that we know this is criminal behavior. These withdrawals are patterns of criminal behavior, and this man has been alleged to be into sex trafficking. And yeah, actually, you do have a duty under the law, and if you didn't fulfill that duty, then you have to pay, obviously. And so the idea that it was better for their PR to settle in this sex trafficking than to not settle? No, just go to trial if you are
to not
innocent.
admit liability pursuant to a settlement and set
Go
up
to
a giant
trial.
compensation fund
where
where
$290 million plus
it's a
attorney
lot of money,
fees.
but it's a lot of
$85 million for attorney's fees.
It's a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, for J.P. Morgan, is it going to like hurtle them into bankruptcy? Probably not, but it might be worth it to finally be rid of this problem. Same with Deutsche Bank, same with the Jeffrey Epstein estate, for that matter. So, I mean, I think the rationale for why those entities ended up with settlements is totally intelligible, and it's really not analogous to Gouffre settling with Dershowitz, which
We
is,
get
I
it.
think,
You
in a
don't like
different
Virginia
category.
Gouffre, but
It's not that I dislike her personally.
No, you clearly
never met
dislike her.
I've never met her. How would I know
Well,
if I
you
like her or
clearly-
dislike her?
Well,
She's a serial fabulist. I mean, could I like a serial fabulist? I guess. But if the claims of a serial fabulist are going to be used to underpin this enormous, all-consuming political narrative that engulfs the entire media and politics, and we're not allowed to point it out, then I think there's a problem here in terms of like what public reasoning is seen as permissible.
But the other problem with all of that is that Gouffre at no point was part of the criminal case, right? She's not part of the South Florida case, which is the one that actually gets picked up in New York. And so now we've got these, I believe it was 4 girls that were identified in South Florida, starting at the age of 13 to 16 years old. It is a crime in the state of Florida. It doesn't matter if you like your abuser or not. It is absolutely a crime for men to have sex with underage girls, to have sexual contact with underage girls, to have them, massage him and pinch his nipples as he masturbates at 14-year-old girls. That is it's a sexual deviant. He's a pervert. And we had enormous amounts, not I say we, but the local prosecutors had mountains of evidence and they simply refused to prosecute in 2006. So it was taken to the FBI. Yes, that is a fact. It was taken to the FBI.
Really?
The FBI then presses on the state's attorney, takes it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They then file a 60-count indictment against him. So we've got plenty of charges to be had. And within 6 months, Alex Acosta, who was a former colleague at Kirkland and Ellis, which was the law firm that was actually representing Epstein, Alex Acosta cooks up this sweetheart MPA, which I have never seen before. To my knowledge, it is unprecedented in that it is practically a blanket pardon for 4 years worth of criminal activity with underage girls. And he cooks this up, and yet that's actually not enough for Jeffrey Epstein. So he then spends the next 8 months negotiating directly with the Deputy Attorney General, which was actually part of your OPR that you linked in your article earlier. And I was very interested in that because I looked at the Deputy Attorney General at the time, and he's a man named Mark Philippe. And Mark Philippe intervened, said, yes, no, we will not be, this is good, we agree. The federal government's not going to step in at all. When Mark Philippe leaves the Bush administration in 2009, where does he go work?
Kirkland and Ellis.
Kirkland and Ellis, where he becomes a partner within 1 year. Okay.
Yes. I mean, Epstein was hiring as many attorneys as he could that would benefit his interest the most. And one of the tactics was to hire people who might have some relation to the prosecutors in South Florida because of professional ties or even personal ties.
We're not talking about South Florida. We're talking about the Deputy Attorney General of the United States.
But the Deputy Attorney, hold on. But first of all, you said something about Gouffre that I have to address, and then we'll get to the NPA. Virginia Gouffre was connected to the only criminal proceeding that ever tested significantly the claims of purported victims, which was the 2021 criminal trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. She was submitted by the government as one of the potential witnesses
but we're
that
not
could be
talking
called
about
to
Maxwell.
trial.
We're talking about Epstein right here.
But that was the only criminal proceeding. So you're saying that Virginia Gouffre wasn't involved in a criminal proceeding, but she was involved in that one.
But she wasn't part of the government's cases against Epstein in 2006.
Oh, in 2006, yes. In 2007, 8, yeah, she wasn't involved.
No, and then the 2019 was just a refiling of those charges.
It wasn't a refiling of the charges, no.
It essentially was, and we actually it's never been disclosed.
I mean, it wasn't.
Exactly
The federal charges were much different in 2019 than they were even contemplated to have been in 2006. It was trafficking. I mean, one of the problems, the Deputy Attorney General didn't say, no, the federal government's not going to get involved. The federal government already was involved. I mean, the way that Alex Acosta framed his motivation and the way that the rest of the prosecutors in his office framed their intervention into the Palm Beach case after having been notified or complained to by the local police there was that they were going to provide a federal backstop so that actually Epstein would be required to face some degree of incarceration and also have to register as a sex offender and also have to agree to the establishment of some mechanism whereby criminal monetary damages could be dispersed from individuals that the government identified as a victim. So it's just not correct that the federal government washed its hands and wasn't involved. It was involved, and it led to the creation of this non-prosecution agreement, which we can get to.
No. The signing of the MPA did not immediately lead to Epstein's guilty plea and incarceration. However, for the next 9 months, Epstein deployed his extensive team of prominent attorneys to try to change the terms. Okay, so the MPA gets established by Acosta.
But the guilty verdict led to the incarceration.
No. Hold on. The MPA gets established by Acosta. All right. So they want to invalidate the entire MPA by persuading senior department officials that there was no federal interest at issue, okay? Through repeated communication in the they sought an obtained review by the department's criminal division and then the office of the Deputy Attorney General, primarily on the issue of federal jurisdiction over what the defense insisted was a quintessentially state matter.
The defense insisted
After reviewing submissions by the defense, the office of the Deputy Attorney General informed defense counsel that the Deputy Attorney General would not intervene in the matter.
Yeah, I mean, you totally misread that.
Not
intervene in the matter in that the Deputy Attorney General would not intervene to stop the ongoing federal action that was that had created the non-prosecution agreement. I mean, what was happening was that Epstein had, very high-powered well-compensated attorneys who were making every possible argument that they could conjure on his behalf. One of those arguments was a federalism argument, and they tried to argue, as you just quoted in that excerpt, that the crimes for which Epstein was being charged were quintessentially state matters, in that they didn't have anything to do with an interstate nexus, and therefore were not in the jurisdiction of the federal government. Ken Starr was making that argument to the Department of Justice, and they went higher and higher up through the echelons of the DOJ to try to appeal to them to intercede in the prosecutor's office in South Florida to try to prevent them from pursuing or getting finalized the non-prosecution agreement. They failed to get the DOJ senior level officials to intervene. So it wasn't. So I think you read that completely opposite to what the meaning was, because Epstein did then plead guilty pursuant to the terms of the non-prosecution agreement in June of 2008.
Epstein pleads guilty 2008, right, to this sweetheart deal that, again, I believe is unprecedented. I have yet to find another case. I looked for something to not only non-prosecution by the federal government on these charges, okay, as far as, and to pursue them higher, right? Because again, we have a 60-count indictment that is still, to my knowledge, sealed to this day. We still don't know how many actual charges and evidence they had for him. But he gets this deal in which not only are they not going to prosecute him on any of these other charges, they're going to give him a clean break on anything that happened between 2002 and 2005. All right. Then not only that, but he also, 4 of his accomplices that we have their names, and then also unnamed accomplices, which is actually what Ghislaine Maxwell is claiming. She is part of this unnamed accomplices, right? I called Jenin, I asked her, I said, I've never heard of anything like this, because it's essentially the pardon for 4 years of criminal activity. And you had never heard of anything like that, correct?
No, definitely not the unnamed accomplices. I mean, I've seen things like someone, committed a crime with their wife, and they're like, if you won't charge my wife, I'll take this plea deal, whatever. But not unnamed accomplices. That's
right. And so
it was unusual, but it wasn't. It was unusual, but it wasn't unprecedented. I think everybody would acknowledge that it was unusual.
Of named and unnamed associates as well.
So the terms of that provision said that 4 younger female, essentially staff of Epstein, who were named, were going to be immunized.
Who were recruiting girls, who were going out, getting girls for him. They were combing the malls. They were going into the trailer parks. They were pulling young, vulnerable girls. That was their job.
I don't know if it was fully established that was their sole job, but whatever their job was, they were immunized per the terms of that provision. And then the provision also did include an unusual. I'll grant. I'm trying to be as evidence-based here as possible. So if a provision is unusual, I'll say that the provision was unusual. An unusual provision that also then immunized any other potential co-conspirators to conduct arising from Epstein's charged violations. And so is that unusual? But sure. But it's also unusual that an extraordinarily wealthy person can hire a dream team of lawyers to very aggressively pursue the best possible negotiation for him. In fact, they failed on that in terms of what Epstein wanted, because they did not, for example, as we just went over, get the senior levels of the DOJ to intercede and nix the federal involvement in the resolution to the charges, because what the defense wanted was for it to be left to the local state authorities in South Florida. They thought that that would be more beneficial to them.
Here's where the problem. Here's where the problem with what you're saying arises. All right. So now we flash forward to 2019, where the victims actually get the court to slightly intervene, in that the court finally acknowledges that the victims Act, I forget the name of it. I think it's a CRVA or something like that. Criminal Victims
Crimes Victims Rights Act.
Yeah. Was violated with this NPA. And so the court doesn't actually nullify the decision, the MPA, right? But they do intervene and they do acknowledge, yes, their rights were violated with this. Okay, so that's when now we've got Southern District of New York steps in. SUNY steps in. They file charges which would have been subjected to that NPA, right? And so 2002 to 2005. Now, what we have been told, and what at news stories at the time said, some of the charges from the 2005 case bled over into 2019, but we were not told exactly which ones. So I've seen two different news articles now. I know I sent a clip of it to Jenin last week.
Because the government, after the Me Too frenzy erupted and Julie Brown wrote her Miami Herald articles,
how is it that New York and SUNY was able to charge Florida and New York? Because those were federal charges.
You're right. The government essentially did decide to nullify the non-prosecution agreement after there was a giant political uproar in the wake of both Me Too and the Miami Herald series in particular for Julie Brown in 2018. So what you're saying is that the federal
government didn't have any real reason to be intercepting to begin with, and now you're saying, okay, well, actually, yeah, that's why 2019, that's why they came back, and yeah, they did have the grounds to do it.
I'm not sure what you're asking. I mean, I think that in terms of the initial prosecution in Florida, there were cops and such who were disenchanted with how the local prosecutor was handling the case in their judgment, and therefore they sought some federal intervention. The federal intervention had an array of potential issues associated with it from a legal and evidentiary standpoint. So, for instance,
didn't, because we know from the 2019 indictments that
Mel, why don't you let Michael finish and then finish his point?
If you read, did you read the entire DOJ OPR report from 2020? Because it goes to this. Okay, well, you should, because it has a lot of illuminating information, and it goes through the significant evidentiary and legal issues associated with that intercession by Acosta into the Florida prosecution that some of the police and detectives and so forth were complaining were not being acted upon quickly enough. So, for example, it would have been almost unprecedented or extremely unusual at that time, and granted, unusual things can happen, for the feds to charge a crime having to do with what at the time was more considered to be prostitution or procurement of prostitution, rather than trafficking, which had a more direct federal nexus, but was still a kind of fledgling area of the law. Actually, Alex Acosta, ironically enough, was one of the people who was working for the DOJ office that sort of presided over human trafficking issues. He was an ambitious young prosecutor who probably was seeking some kind of political career, and in pursuant to that, he would bring these headline-grabbing cases around child sex trafficking involving the internet and so forth, based on new statutes that came about in the early to mid 2000s, based on To Catch a Predator TV show and other stuff that generated attention around to what extent children could be trafficked based on using the internet. So Alex Acosta was very immersed in that stuff. So let me just finish. Okay. And so he then did intercede at the behest of the people involved in the Palm Beach investigation, who sort of beseeched him in his office to do so. And then it created a whole host of legal and evidentiary issues. The legal issues in terms of like jurisdiction. Would something like this be within the remit of the federal prosecutors to actually charge? And then evidentiary issues, including that a whole host of the purported victims either recanted their testimony claiming sexualized encounters with Epstein, did not want him to be prosecuted based on what they told investigators, or acknowledged that, for instance, they lied and said that they were 18. Now, to be clear, from a moral perspective, I am not defending in any way a man in his 50s even coming close to potentially liaising sexually, or even, to the line of sexually, with teenage girls, some of whom may be just over 18, some of whom may just be under or whatever. So from a moral standpoint, obviously I would object to that. But from a legal standpoint, clearly there were massive evidentiary hurdles that even some of the most hard-charging prosecutors who were demanding that the government take the hardest possible line against Epstein acknowledged could be a severe impairment at trial. I mean, you had people who wanted to prosecute Epstein in the federal government's office saying he could be
filibustering.
He had a
yeah. Now it's Mel's turn. Now it's Mel's turn.
Last sentence. There were prosecutors in Acosta's office saying that if they took the case to trial, which was a real possibility, they stood a significant chance of actually losing, and Epstein would be acquitted and face no penalty.
First of all, every single freaking prosecutor on the planet says that. All right, that is a standard line. They don't like to go to trial. They are very risk adverse. They love to cut the deals. All right, 96% of all cases in this country end in plea deals. All right, prosecutors don't actually like to go to trial. They don't. All right, number one.
It's a lot of work.
It's
like 1,000 times more work than a plea deal.
And the number one thing, especially in these kind of cases, is, well, our witness probably isn't very, or our victim, she might not be very credible and whatnot. When you have underage men sleeping with or, engaging in sexual acts with you have old men engaging in sexual acts with underage girls, 14-year-old girls. Again, we have this testimony from a 14-year-old girl at the time who
said that she lied and said she was 18. Again, that's no defense legally.
No, she did not say that.
Yeah, I can give you the citation.
You can give me the citation from, I'm reading from, let's see, Relentless Pursuit, which is from the Bradley Edwards. He was her criminal, or he was her
okay, you know who
attorney.
he is, right? He's the plaintiff's lawyer who made an astronomical amount of money from this case. But sure, give it to me. I mean, I could quote you. Julie Brown in her book. You know her, Julie Brown, the author of the Miami Herald series.
Hold up. I'm not done yet.
She says that the 14-year-old, there was a 14-year-old who was told by one of the other teenage girls who was slightly older that she could go to Epstein's mansion, give him a massage, and then get $200, and they could go to the mall afterwards. She was told by that other girl to lie to him about her age, and then she did lie to him about her age, according to
in the testimony
Julie Brown.
that I listened to from Bradley Edwards' book, which I'm only about 4 chapters in, that is not part of what was said. Okay?
So Julie Brown is wrong?
If we're talking about the same girl, then yeah, that's not the testimony that's not what Bradley Edwards put in his book from 2022, I believe it is. So
well,
2002.
Also, statutory rape is generally a strict liability crime, so it doesn't matter whether you knew or not. Which, for the purposes, I mean, if the presumption is there's a blackmail ring, and you're blackmailing these guys because they've been sleeping with underage girls, it doesn't actually matter whether they thought the girls were 18 or not. The blackmail still works.
Sure, I mean, but the point is that there were serious evidentiary problems having to do with the impeachability of witnesses and contradictory statements and so forth.
And I'm saying
including
that the
some
government
witnesses
says that all the time.
Well, I mean, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But let's be specific about this case. I mean, there were witnesses who opposed the government prosecuting Epstein at all, who made exonerating statements about him. So yes, the defense is going to be able to use that in a trial to potentially tell the jury that they can't convict him beyond a reasonable doubt.
The defense always has things that they can use, okay? No, when you got old men sleeping with 14-year-old girls, you got them pinching his nipples as he's masturbating. Actually, they don't really have a whole lot of defense.
There's also
no defense.
There's a ton. I mean, the inconsistency in testimony is just, that's like the most constant thing. And people give their statements to the police and then they give their trial testimony. It often differs a lot because people's memories are just not very good. There may have been drugs involved. I don't really know that much about each of these specific circumstances, but
she says that she was recruited from another friend in band. She has braces at the time. She's 14 years old. You know what a 14-year-old girl looks like when you walk in. Saying, I thought she was 18 is bullshit. He knew she didn't have a car. She didn't have her driver's license because he had to send his driver to come get her. There's really no.
I don't know how you can deny that it's an evidentiary problem if, for instance, the original accuser, whose parents called the Palm Beach police initially to report there's suspicions that their daughter, who I believe was 14 at the time, had engaged in some sexual activity or a sexualized massage or however we want to characterize it with Epstein. She then later recanted her statement that she had engaged in any sexualized activity with Epstein. So it's obviously an evidentiary problem for somebody to recant their statement.
It is
inconsistency.
It is, well, it's actually extremely common, especially like in these situations where people are, there might be some kind of Stockholm syndrome or, there's a power dynamic. I mean, we constantly had, I was an appellate criminal defense lawyer for 9 years. Like, we constantly had people writing in, abused wives who their husbands were in prison for domestic violence or rape victims saying it didn't happen. Like, judges don't even consider that, generally speaking, to be they don't take that evidence very seriously.
What about juries?
It's so
well, if someone's convicted and then later,
right, but the whole calculation was should the government risk what they saw to be a high probability that they would lose the case entirely and Epstein would be acquitted, or should they arrange for this non-prosecution agreement in which Epstein would be required to plead guilty to state-level charges and then would face some measure of penalties, such as some term of incarceration, some registering for the sex offender registry, and then offering some compensation to the designated victims.
The NPA says he's only going to plead guilty to state charges, and then he's guaranteed non-prosecution by the feds. Correct. I want to make sure that we're clear on that.
Yeah, for future offenses arising from the charged conduct.
Not
to which
future
he pled
offenses
guilty.
For the 2002 to 2005. All offenses.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, yes, that's right.
Okay,
For Epstein.
so the
but for the
feds
co-conspirators, it was,
The feds didn't charge. Okay, so the feds didn't intervene.
Well, they did intervene. They're the ones who brokered the non-prosecution agreement.
Gave him an immunity deal.
They intervened to broker a non-prosecution agreement whereby Epstein was compelled to charge, to plead to lower level. I mean, I don't know what you say by didn't intervene. Like that OPR report, which you say you read, is 350 pages detailing the federal intervention in this issue.
The federal intervention was quite literally, we think we got a bad case, so actually what we're going to do is we're going to get you to plead guilty to these state charges. You're going to get to go to county jail for 13 months. You get to get out 12 hours every day. You can slip a 50 to the guard, and he'll keep your cell door open, and you can go in between the lawyer room. And, and the feds aren't going to charge you for anything, even though now, once we get that, it comes into question. It never gets overturned. By the way, the NPA never gets overturned. Then we get this indictment from 2019, which actually goes back and it shows that the federal government did, in fact, have lots and lots of room in which they could have charged him at the time, because there were plenty of. It's not like these laws are, were passed after they were in existence. All right, you don't get to charge.
Yeah, just recently in existence in terms of some of the trafficking statutes.
No, that's not how
absolutely.
it works.
I mean, the year 2000 is one of the one of the statutes that was signed into law. That was
Jenny, can the government go back and charge you for crimes if it wasn't against the law at the time?
No, I'm saying that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying some of these federal trafficking statutes were only recently enacted. And so there was not a huge body of law or practice around charging with respect to those practices.
They couldn't charge him for 2005 trafficking if it wasn't illegal at the time.
I know. I'm not saying anything otherwise. I don't know what you're trying to say.
They could have charged him in 2008 with these charges. The federal government could have charged him. And they
possibly could have. No. And I'm not denying that it's possible that they could have charged him if they
instead what they did was they gave him an NPA and said, we're not going to charge you for anything. Here you go.
Right. We're going to instead compel you to plead guilty to state-level charges.
We're going to compel you to this sweetheart deal at the state level, and then in exchange, we'll give you basically
I don't think they used the term sweetheart deal. I think that was a later.
Well, I'm sure they didn't. But they give him this sweetheart deal. Then they also say we're not going to charge any of your associates at all either.
Yeah, I mean, let's get into that. Did you read the section about that in the OPR report?
I read an overview of it. Because this is the thing that's actually at question.
Right. This is like the rub of it.
All the way up to this to SCOTUS. And what I find very interesting is that's not what was That's actually not what was in question, the fidelity of the NPA, but it's actually the fact that whether or not the Southern District of New York has to abide by it, right? So that's another legal question. I actually think the Supreme Court's probably going to end up
there's a split in the circuit courts over that issue, meaning if the government brokers a non-prosecution agreement in one area, does that apply throughout the rest of the country? And the circuits are split, hence the appeal to the Supreme Court.
I actually think it should be applied. I do think. I just think it's bullshit that it applies to her. Because I think that the whole thing shouldn't exist to begin with.
Well, it does exist, and so it's an issue if the government can just decide willy-nilly or based on political pressure to totally abridge or nullify a non-prosecution agreement.
We agree
and
on
Maxwell
that.
was charged as a co-conspirator to one person, Epstein. So I think there's a decent case to be made that the NPA does apply.
She's not named in the NPA, and so the idea that you can just do this blanket pardon, because then, of course, what happens if the Supreme Court says, yeah, actually the NPA is good in all named and unnamed associates, does that mean that every single person that committed any crime around Epstein in relation to this kind of sex trafficking stuff, are they now get a free pass too?
Yeah, that's very bizarre because you also don't know what people did. Like, information might come to light later that someone did something even worse. So to
so in the OPR report, which again I really do suggest that people read if they're interested in the story because it's incredibly comprehensive. There's a lot of like direct quotes, documentary records, etc. It's not just like
there's a lot of ass covering by the government.
Well, arguably, if you want to put it that way. But even if you don't want, even if you just ignore the subjective determinations that are made, there's a lot of evidentiary material, and they quote some of the prosecutors who were involved in Acosta's office during that time, saying they did not perceive this to be a global immunization for anybody who could have ever potentially conspired with Epstein about anything. Rather, their perceptions contemporaneously were that this provision was much more narrow than how it came to be framed afterwards in the wake of the proliferation of this Epstein mythology and in the wake of Virginia Giuffre making these outlandish claims about child sex trafficking to prominent individuals and blackmail and so forth. In 2007-8, the scope of the co-conspirators that were envisioned to be in existence were the four named younger women who were on the staff of Epstein, but also potentially even the victims themselves, because by the letter of the law, if, say, an 18-year-old teenage girl facilitated or in some way enabled the, let's say, transportation of another teenage girl to Epstein's house, then she could theoretically be charged with trafficking. Now, would there probably be prosecutorial discretion to not charge her? Probably, but you never know. I mean, it's not unheard of for that to happen. So the defense attorneys, the prosecutors, virtually everyone who was involved in the negotiation of the non-prosecution agreement did not even have any cognizance that the unnamed co-conspirators would later be sort of attributed to be these prominent individuals who Epstein was alleged to have consorted with.
You're taking a lot of liberty on their part. Second of all, that's literally their job. It is their job to anticipate the consequences of the deals that they make. Okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think they anticipated that they were actually doing something that was supposed to be legally advantageous to the purported victims who might otherwise get ensnared in prosecutions, and they didn't want them to be prosecuted. So because there was this sort of universe of potential conspirators, meaning teenage girls who were in this particular clique who could be possibly said to have trafficked one another, then it immunizes all of them.
These all are a bunch of little sluts who can't be trusted with anything. And the other thing, we got to really look out for them and make sure that we don't ruin their futures. I mean, come on. You at all turns, and this is an issue that I take with you on this, is that you at all turns have given the government the full benefit of the doubt.
No, I've done the opposite. Are you kidding?
That's literally exactly what you're doing.
Giving the government the benefit of the doubt. I mean, when I criticize aspects of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial and Maureen Comey's case that she made, I'm not giving the government the benefit of the doubt. I'll acknowledge that I'm kind of instinctively have an affinity for the defense in most circumstances, and that applies here as well.
Well, it appears in the Epstein case, definitely, especially in 2008, that the defense and the prosecution were on the same side. Because, again, certainly they are, because at the end of the day, it's the prosecution that comes under high scrutiny, right? And
Epstein's attorneys tried every tactic they could possibly conjure to see to it.
It's literally their job.
I agree, it's their job. And in carrying out their job, they tried every imaginable tactic to, for example, come to a resolution whereby Epstein would not have to plead to a charge that then required him to register as a sex offender, and they failed, in part because of the federal backstop or the federal intervention by Acosta to see to it that the eventual charges to which Epstein pleaded guilty were not lenient enough where he would be absolved of having to register as a sex offender.
From what I understand, there was literally
so how are they on the same
side
when there were these vicious battles for months over every little last detail of each provision?
First of all, it really wasn't. The initial indictment starts in May. By September, the MPA is written. So you're talking about 5 months. You've got years. You've got decades worth of crimes being committed in 5 months. We get it wrapped up in an MPA. He then flees to Israel, where he gets this guarantee eventually from the government, basically saying, "Nope, everything looks on the up and up to us. We're not gonna
I don't think Epstein ever fled to Israel.
Yes, he did. He absolutely.
So he absconded from the United States to Israel?
From the United States to Israel for 7 months.
To avoid prosecution?
No, to avoid from the sentencing, from the time the NPA was agreed upon until he sentenced. Look it up.
Yeah, so the MPA was agreed in September of 2007.
He doesn't actually come back and plead.
He pleads guilty in June of 2008. I'm not sure that he spent that entire 7 months in Israel. I'm happy to be corrected. I'm happy to be corrected. I know he was in various properties, so maybe he did go to Israel at some point, but I'm not aware of that. But I don't claim to have a totally comprehensive knowledge of every single possible detail here. So
there's a great little news article.
The last time we saw Jeffrey Epstein in West Palm Beach was September 6th of last year. He was getting off his private jet at TBIA to huddle with lawyers, fighting charges he used his mansion in Palm Beach for sexual escapades with girls under 18. Reliable sources tell us he'll report for a 1.5-year term in prison in Florida in June, then face a year probation. The fact that Epstein was allowed to travel to Israel reflects his vast business interests around the world, according to someone close to the case. But allowing someone soon to be imprisoned on felony charges to leave the country is highly irregular. That, according to investigative journalist John Connolly, who has covered the Epstein scandal from day one.
In most instances where people are facing criminal time and because a plea agreement has been made or they're under arrest for serious charges, they are forced to surrender their passport. And apparently Mr. Epstein has not been forced to do that.
The fact that the court ordered Epstein not to have contact with underage girls may indicate that Epstein will be labeled a sex offender. That is something his vast stable of high-powered attorneys have been fighting. Sources tell us that Epstein will likely report to a state prison with modern internet facilities so that he can do business from behind bars. It's been more than 3 years now since Palm Beach police started investigating Jeffrey Epstein. Reporter Connolly says money has bought him time.
I've always been a bit shocked by the way the state prosecutor has handled this case from the get-go. Historically, the police have asked for arrest warrants and been given them. In this case, because of apparently some very high-powered attorneys, they've treated Mr. Epstein much differently.
Right, so this doesn't mean that Epstein spent the entire period from September of 2007 to April of 2008 in Israel. He also had he also spent time in New York, and he had properties in New Mexico and in Paris. I think my understanding is, I can't quote you chapter and verse here, but I think he was primarily in New York at the time. But he did lessen the amount of time that he spent in Palm Beach while this prosecutorial activity was going on.
From what I
he
understand,
absconded to Israel or fled to Israel, I should say.
From what I understand, he was in Israel. The news article implies
for the whole period.
Yes. That's from what I understand.
So continuously from September of 2007 to April of 2008, he was in Israel?
That is
but that's not what they say
understand.
in that news segment.
They say he's returning, and that
he flew from Israel to Florida.
You're really kind of.
I don't think that's so important. First, the issue is he left the country with under these circumstances, which is unheard of. I've never heard of anything like that. So another issue I want to bring up is a lot of people have questions about how he was so wealthy, given his background. I mean, he was like a teacher at Dalton, and then he did some consulting or something like that. And but then he had this vast wealth. And I think people have questions about that and are wondering, how did that happen if that's connected to some nefarious activities? So, I mean, is that something you've addressed or have thoughts on?
How did he acquire his wealth?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, I would be all in favor of doing the maximum possible audit of every aspect of how he acquired and retained and grew his wealth.
But you acknowledge it's a little weird that he was so wealthy, like given.
I find a lot of financial management pretty weird. Like a lot of people who get incredibly wealthy through hedge fund dealings. I know he wasn't strictly a hedge fund, most likely. But all these complex financial maneuvers where they can provide consulting, quote unquote, to high net worth individuals and so forth, I find it all a little weird. So if we want to think of it as weird in terms of like how people who are in this stratum of society can garner ill-gained wealth, then, I don't necessarily disagree with that analysis. I think that there's like, a decent amount that's publicly known about how he acquired his wealth. I mean, I think everybody who's, to my knowledge, interacted with him or assessed him agreed that he was reasonably intelligent, even very intelligent. And so he taught at that private school, Dalton, and then met Ace Greenberg, who was the head of Bear Stearns, and then was hired to work at Bear Stearns and like pretty rapidly ascended through Bear Stearns. And then there was some issue that led to him leaving. By his early to mid-20s, I think he was like a relatively high-level partner. I might not have the term exactly right, within Bear Stearns. And then he launches his own like boutique firm in which he advises high net worth individuals and does some other things. I mean, do I claim to have like total encyclopedic knowledge of how he acquired every little like penny in his net worth? No, but I think there's a lot that's known, and like so even if there are holes in terms of our knowledge as to how he acquired his wealth, what are we supposed to infer from that therefore this was a Mossad operation? Like, explain to me the logical leap there or the causal connection.
Let's go. I've got some other quotes, I believe, pulled from Bradley Edwards' book, who apparently you don't find credible. Apparently only some people are allowed to make. I find him credible.
I'm just noting that he's the plaintiff's attorney.
He made a lot of money, right?
Well, did he not?
I also think, just really quick, I think, people are sort of putting together pieces of a puzzle, right? Like, you're like, this doesn't make sense.
Connecting, I think, was the term used. I remember during Russiagate,
sure,
Democrats and liberals would always say, why can't you connect these dots? Why don't you understand where there's smoke, there's fire? So they would throw like spaghetti at the wall, all this disparate information that they were trying to piece together into some grandiose puzzle that solved the grand espionage theory. Like, weirdly enough, there are some parallels with Russiagate in that, it's overlain with it's like an espionage drama with like titillating sexual blackmail involved, where Trump had the P-tape, and everybody now, like Bill Clinton and Bill Gates and maybe even Trump himself and all manner of other people, have this sexual blackmail floating around that's supposed to like dictate how the world is governed or something. So there are some parallels.
I think here's a big difference is that a lot of people just can't, as Mel talked about at the beginning, a lot of people cannot wrap their heads around how certain people, a lot of people in political positions of power have this unequivocal, support for Israel. And like I would say, like off the top of my head, there's RFK Jr., who's I've talked to. He's a pretty smart guy. I find it hard to believe that he really thinks the Palestinians are the most privileged people in the world, which he claims to think, and other people who clearly had close affiliations with Epstein. And so it begs the question, why? Like, what is going on? And it's also known that they have like some like tendency towards sex addiction or sexual proclivities. And then you put it together with some of this stuff and it starts to look really suspicious. Like, would I say, would I stake my career on this? No. Would I stake my reputation on it? No. But like, am I highly, highly suspicious? Yes. I would say that's where I stand.
I just think it's not, I don't view it as some totally inexplicable mystery why it is that American politicians tend to fervently support Israel. I think to lapse into this scandalous explanation that it must have to do with illicit blackmail networks is kind of lazy and misdiagnoses the issue. So I'm not saying this is somebody who's saying we have to ensure that nobody criticizes Israel or does not properly characterize the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
You're kind of mischaracterizing what
RFK Jr. has been his family were pro-Israel fanatics for decades.
No, they weren't. No, they absolutely
yes, they were.
Not.
I mean, the delusions about John F. Kennedy are insane. We shouldn't get detoured on that.
First of all,
but it's
they just simply were not. Yes, no, they weren't.
They were.
I mean, Kennedy didn't want them.
Who was the first U.S. president to sell Israel weapons?
He sold to them.
It was John F. Kennedy, right?
First of all, actually, the sale wasn't even completed until Johnson. Okay,
who initiated
it? He agreed to the sale of Hawks contingent on nuclear inspections.
Yeah, I wouldn't say JFK was the most pro-Israel president ever.
Well, no,
I mean, quite far from it.
Israel
64. No. You need to look into
67 was a turning point.
No, you need to look into the 1963 investigations by the House or the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, in which they look into and they really drill down hard on the influence of the Israeli lobby, specifically J.W. Fulbright, who goes in. Really gets JFK to sign executive orders mandating that the IRS open up its books for Fulbright, which had never happened before, and give the Senate Investigation Committee all access to these NGOs and these nonprofits that were being ran by Israeli front groups. It is just flat out false to say that JFK was in any way, shape, or form, quote unquote, pro-Israel. That is
all right. Well, I wildly disagree with that. I could give you a million quotes where he. I mean,
no, you can't. You literally can't.
He campaigned for Democrats in the 1962 midterm elections by going to Jewish groups in New York and saying, "Hey, vote Democrat because I will reward you as one of my constituencies by authorizing arms sales to Israel." This idea that he was anti-Israel, I mean, it's this whole bizarre theology people have developed around JFK.
Not
anti-Israel,
but
there's not pro-Israel.
They maintained the Eisenhower philosophy. He actually excoriated Israel.
So he was assassinated by Mossad because he was too anti-Israel?
Well, I actually have a theory on that, but I'm not going to disclose it at some point. Yeah, I will one day. But you actually can't back up anything. I've looked into this extensively.
I just gave you a firm and concrete example.
No, you didn't. You said he went to pro-Israel groups in the 1962 elections and said, "Vote for me, and we will
vote
give
for
you
Democrats."
People.
Yeah.
Vote for Democrats.
Yeah, that's not. I mean, that's what politicians do. They go to the group and they say, "Well, do what you want."
And then he turned around in 63 and demanded full access to nuclear power plants. All right, he did, and to the point where Ben-Gurion resigns prior to this telegraph being delivered. Of course, I'm sure you just dismissed that as whatever. He grants all of Fulbright's executive order requests to access all of the Zion Association of America, Israel Association of America, Israel Inc. Association of America. There's 16 different associations that Fulbright is given full access to their IRS documentations, which of course they were furious about. So, and then 3 days before he is assassinated, he has, what's his name, at the UN. I know you guys know, he ran for president twice in the 50s.
Oh, God.
Democrat ticket.
Adlai Stevens.
There you go. He actually has him recognize the Palestinian refugees and calls for their right of return. This is 3 days. November 19th, 1963, recognizes the right of Palestinians to return to their land.
Okay. Well, on the other hand, John F. Kennedy was the first president to publicly vow that the U.S. would come to the aid of Israel militarily and started arming Israel. So if you want to say that he was therefore somehow not pro-Israel, I guess I just disagree.
He was absolutely neutral. Now, I will say he wasn't going to pull us out of Vietnam. That is, in fact, false. All right? He did escalate in Vietnam.
I agree.
And of course, and the Israelis figured it out that they should their better ploy was actually not to appeal to the Jewish ideas and whatnot, was actually to play up the anti-communism card. And of course, label all Arabs as commies, and that is in fact where we get this relic that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East that, just kind of transferred over to the war on terror and whatnot.
I guess the point is to posit that the only viable explanation, or the most viable explanation, for why contemporary political figures support Israel, whether it's RFK Jr. or not, it's got to be because they were ensnared in Epstein's sexual blackmail ring. I find that to be totally implausible and not supported by any credible evidence at all. I think there are a lot of intelligible reasons why the U.S. political system is tilted so strongly toward Israel. You have the evangelical Christians, which I know you're aware of. You have Jewish... The evangelical Christians don't exist?
Oh, they do, but their lobby only started in 1995 when the formation between...
I know, I'm saying in present. I'm saying in present. We're in the Epstein era.
Currently, yeah, but again, that is... Their power is very small. Evangelical Christians
not on the Republican Party. Their power is enormous.
In the Bible
they have
Belt...
the Speaker of the House is one of their followers, essentially.
The Bible Belt has 10 senators maybe, and 50 congressmen. It's not that it's helpless. It's just that it's interesting that it's the only that support for Israel seems to be the only thing evangelicals can actually squeeze out of this Congress.
There are Republicans who are Christian who support Israel on Christian grounds or grounds of religiosity that are.
I'm an evangelical. I don't know a single person that votes based solely on whether or not you support Israel.
Not solely,
I just don't.
Partially.
Well, there are probably a lot of them, like the pastor.
There probably. I mean, well, certainly. I mean, there are.
And Ted Cruz admitted that's the reason he's in the Senate.
And of course, there are donors, some of whom are more Republican leaning, some of them more Democratic leaning. You have organized sort of influence networks that around Jewish organizations. You have the national security apparatus, think tank, and so forth that are filled with people who are pro-Israel. I mean, there's a multiplicity, I think, of explanations for why it is that the U.S. political system is generally geared toward Israel.
Sure,
don't
there's
rely
really not
on
because we don't get anything
speculative
out of it.
Gossip around sexual blackmail that there's not a shred of evidence for.
I wouldn't say there's not a shred of evidence. I mean, the people going to Epstein Island.
I mean, first of all, we know from Clinton insiders details that the Israelis tried to blackmail him with the Lewinsky scandal. We know that.
You know, I heard about that recently. I admit I was not that familiar with that claim until pretty recently. I'm a little dubious about that.
Of course you are.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked. I thought you would be completely...
There was one guy who wrote, there was a guy who wrote about that named Daniel Halper, who is, if you want to use the term neocon, hardcore neocon journalist. He published a book on this, and I haven't put in the effort to examine whether I find it to be adequately substantiated. Okay, so, but
it's just interesting that all of your skepticism seems to come down on one side.
It's based on the evidence. I'm trying to be as maximally tethered to the evidence as I possibly can be. The fact that prominent people went to the Virgin Islands on the private island owned by Jeffrey Epstein is in no way like ipso facto evidence of a Mossad blackmail ring.
It's not.
It's US politics. So there's no causal connection there at all.
By itself, but here's what we do know about that island. We know that it was wired. We know every single room in the house was wired with cameras, hidden cameras, and sound recording. Okay, that's weird.
And Lee Fong was on here the other day talking about how Epstein was bribing customs officers to look the other way about the girls that he was bringing in.
Well, yeah, I mean, he used his resources to get the most lenient possible treatment from a whole variety of state authorities, including in the Virgin Islands, having to do with his sex offender registration requirements.
So let us see. We've got. If the federal government had put in just a modicum of effort into this case, now we could have gotten officials in the Virgin Islands on record saying, yeah, he actually bribed us. He paid us money. All right, to traffic girls. I don't know if it counts as international. Maybe not. Probably not. To the Virgin Islands. But again, this goes back to this being a highly federal case, okay? Then we've actually got testimony from many girls that he was in fact a sex addict. He had to have orgasms at least 3 times a day. That goes into, well, if you've got Ehud Barak in your house at least 30 times that we know of in a one what 15 months period?
Who has the energy for 3 times a day? Jesus Christ. Okay.
Every day? Yeah, well, you're an addict, right? You're yeah, I mean,
it's like a lot of time and energy. Okay.
Well, but in terms of the girls who were purportedly trafficked to the U.S. Virgin Islands, a lot of these were adult women. Like some of the named accusers. Why doesn't it matter?
We're talking about girls.
I thought we were talking about a child sex trafficking ring.
Well, it doesn't matter if you're trying to blackmail people because, they have wives and stuff and they don't want it to be known that they were having sex with other women.
I mean, I thought the whole reason everyone was so incensed about this was because of a pedophilia ring. But now we're beyond that, I guess.
No, it doesn't matter if there were of-age girls there as well, as long as there were underage girls. You're trying to undermine this by saying, well, there were lots of girls there and some of them were of age. I don't care if there were of-age girls there. That doesn't make it right to have underage girls there.
I'm not saying that anything about Epstein's lifestyle was quote-unquote right. I just think that people get well beyond the facts on this issue to sort of satisfy their need to come up with these psychically gratifying theories that somehow just overlay with all their pre-existing political views very neatly.
No.
Again, that we have some kind of psychological need that we need to fulfill because we're just so batshit insane that we gotta fill in, we gotta do all QAnon. No, we are actually recognizing that there was a man who, number one, was a prolific predator, all right, who had very shady business deals. I didn't even interrupt on the whole Epstein finance thing because that's just nuts in and of itself. There are multiple quotes that he was actually an idiot. All right, so nobody actually really understands how he got this money. We do know that he was involved with Bear Stearns, which he was then pushed out of Bear Stearns in like 1999, and then was kind of had this, but he's still in an association. Okay, you're right. But he still had an association with them, and then he starts this.
Yeah, he was a client of Bear Stearns
he has this massive hedge fund, right? That is attached to them. It's like Legacy Financial or something like that, I believe. Which he then, very interestingly enough, pulls $57 million out of his Bear Stearns account right before it collapses, and is taken over by J.P. Morgan Chase, which is also another thing which I meant to look into, haven't had time to yet, but what in fact, as far as the financial records go with Bear Stearns, because that was in fact his financial house during when all of these crimes were committed. It actually wasn't in fact JP Morgan. JP Morgan took over Bear Stearns. Was JP Morgan protecting those Bear Stearns documents, right? And
I think he was a client of J.P. Morgan in addition to Bear Stearns for a period. You can go check. My memory is it's the late 90s to 2013. He was a client of J.P. Morgan.
His finances were with Bear Stearns. J.P. Morgan takes over Bear Stearns in March of 2008, right as they're
So I mean, what are you suggesting that the Mossad told him that Bear Stearns was about to fail or something?
I didn't say anything about the Mossad.
I know, but like, what's the salacious inference we're supposed to draw from that series of facts?
Well, number one, it's interesting to me that he does seem to have this very, very impeccable timing, right? He's able to pull out all of his finances, everything. Probably most things obviously wouldn't be FDIC insured. And he pulls them out, whatever. I'm not even going to go there, even though I do think it's a little interesting that Mark Philippe was also in charge of the DOJ's investigation into white-collar crimes at the time, and he decided to take a more cautious approach to white-collar crime at the exact same time that, the entire U.S. financial system is melting down. And then, of course, he gets this sweetheart deal at Kirkland Ellis.
Okay, can I just make I don't really know where we're going with that, or like what inference we're supposed to draw.
Hold on. You have been filibustering pretty much the whole time, okay?
Have I?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm neglecting my moderation duties.
No,
I was just going to make an additional point because I thought you had kind of trailed off on that one. But if you want to tell us what we're supposed to infer from what you're saying.
No, so number one, you talked about, let's say, JFK or RFK going back. RFK is a sex addict. All right, we do know that. He's a confessed sex addict. In fact,
he wrote a book about it, right?
I know, he said he confessed to that in the past.
Okay,
I don't know
so the idea that he would be friends,
I'm not sure.
The idea that he would be friends with and perhaps susceptible to blackmail is just, that's kind of really goes with the territory. The fact that he's a good friend with Jeffrey Epstein, he travels to the island often.
Is there a shred of any evidence anywhere that?
Well, we don't know because the FBI has kept it hidden for God knows how long. Oh, I know. That's so crazy, right? The FBI, they're so honest.
So the FBI is concealing videos of RFK Jr. engaging
Do you
in
know
illicit
anything
sex
about
act
a
with
police
minors.
investigation? Do you think that it takes like a lot of people to conceal something like this?
No, I just don't think there's any reason to believe at all that the FBI
Right,
or
'cause
any
you
government
defer to
agency
the
is concealing.
government,
I'm not
and
deferring to the
you-
government.
Yeah, you are.
I'm
You're giving them
deferring
the
to the
benefit of the
evidence.
doubt.
I'm deferring to the evidence.
But
I
The evidence you
want
haven't
there to be
seen,
maximum
and the
disclosure.
evidence
Let's
that
do
the
it.
government refuses to release.
Okay. Also,
The
wait,
reason why
we're
the
not.
government's- yeah.
We haven't addressed one of the main points, which is that the Trump administration's refusal to actually release the files after promising it is a lot of what has spurred this.
Sure,
So
I agree.
let's talk about that.
Let's talk about it. I have accused the Trump administration and its affiliates, particularly in the right-wing media and on social media, of being guilty of a trafficking conspiracy of their own, which is they traffic in total bullshit and political charlatanism. And they're hucksters, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino being perfect examples. As private citizens, they're perfectly willing to play to the id of the right-wing social media sort of sphere by channeling this perpetual need that, yes, a lot of them do seem to have to believe that there's a child sex trafficking ring everywhere and everywhere that's being covered up by demonic Democrats and whomever. Hence, why this whole Epstein saga does borrow thematically from QAnon. Epstein is more concretely, factually predicated than QAnon, but in terms of why people are so ginned up by it and exercised by it, there is a lot of overlap. And so Patel, Bongino, these other people, when they're private citizens and hosting Rumble shows or whatever, or on podcasts, yeah, they cater to that impulse in the audience to say, look, of course, they're covering up a pedophile list. Kash Patel said, put on your big boy pants and show us who the pedophiles are. Christopher Wray supposedly has the list of pedophiles on his desk or in the vault somewhere, but he's just hiding them because he wants to protect Bill Gates and Bill Clinton or something. And so they gin up this anticipation. Trump himself is a little more non-committal. He doesn't voluntarily bring this issue up ever, really, except when he's on these dopey podcasts where the host asks him about Epstein. And he says, yeah, maybe we'll do it, but there could be some phony stuff. And then they get into office. Pam Bondi is delegated to be in charge of this. She's on Fox News. She gives some interview where she's imprecise with her language about what files she's currently reviewing. She seems to be referring to some consolidated list that anybody, I think, who's familiar with the story understands never quite existed as far as anybody could tell. And then now it's just snowballs from there. So a lot of this is very much intelligible to me, but by reference of political cynicism and charlatanism, rather than Trump and his Confederates all of a sudden decided that they were going to cover up a gigantic pedophile ring, which I don't find to be plausible.
I agree that they are full of shit and, always talking out of their asses, all right? So just release the files. Just release them, okay? It's really not that difficult.
I agree. I agree with calls for maximum disclosure of files, but it should be noted that to the extent that files continue to be concealed, I don't think that there's been an adequate appreciation that a lot of those files are being concealed by in deference to the purported victims who are judged by
You can black out names. You can black out names. It's not
but there
difficult.
could be identifying information.
No,
Even if you black out the name.
That is such a cop-out.
It may be a cop-out, but it's the rationale given for why much of this material continues to be
I have
concealed,
been
both
through
by the
mountains
judges
of discovery.
and
I know
by
exactly
the
what
DOJ.
redactions look like for confidential informants. It's very
I'm
easy.
gonna have to argue with you on that one because I redacted information in Missouri versus Biden for journalists, and it was very, very time consuming.
They have
but,
had 6 years.
Yeah.
to do this.
Okay. And they have staff that I don't. So I think we should
6 full years.
I think we should end on a note of agreement that they should release the files. Apparently
Release the files.
my husband and baby went for a walk so they wouldn't be making noise, and they're very, very hot because it's like 1,000 degrees here in DC. So they are begging to come in.
Yes.
And continue making noise.
I would be horrified to contaminate your baby with anything Epstein related. So
I know. He was so sweet.
He doesn't understand anything at all. But
I guess just in closing, I just want to convey that if people disagree with anything that I've said here, or they object to any aspect of the arguments that I've made, whether on this stream or on the many other streams or debates that I've done or on the articles that I've written, etc., that's fine. I'm always willing to engage, but the imputation of some foul motive where it's just like some cynical careerist move, I think, has no relation to what I can consciously conceive in my own head in terms of what motivates me. I'm motivated to cover this story for the same reasons I would have been motivated to cover Russiagate or the 2020 riots or Ukraine war, Israel war, any other thing that I've gotten immersed in over the years. It's based on a journalistic instinct and a fidelity, at least as I see it, to the facts and evidence and what inferences can be reasonably drawn from them, and do they contradict with the prevailing narratives that are being fed to people who might not have the context or the requisite information to process them, maybe in the way that I do. So that's what's motivating me.
And I will give you full credit for approaching me and willingly agreeing. I actually didn't even see your response that you were willing to come on the podcast, and then you followed up. So full credit to you.
There you go.
That you were here to clear your name. Excellent. And also, I would say that anyone who would suggest that you are in some way, some kind of sexual deviant or anything to your character for the position that you're taking, which I believe is, obviously I think it's wrong from just like an argumentative standpoint, but, I think it's really gross that you can't have these kind of debates without somebody accusing someone of being some kind of like pedo or something like that's fucking ridiculous.
Well, that's why these debates don't happen. That's why there's so little scrutiny of the narrative underpinnings of the story, because people don't want to subject themselves to a tsunami of insane, vitriolic, defamatory accusations.
Right, and good for you that, and not just good for you. I mean, it's respectable, right? It's commendable. And people who do that, like, just grow the up. I don't like you either. I mean, just stop being such simplistic little shits, all right? And just for 1 second,
you should see my tweets and emails and comments all day, every day.
I can.
we see some of them.
I'm sure you do.
Somebody the other day was like, "You're so full of yourself," and I'm like, "Do you understand? You kind of actually have to be, because if you're not, like, the absolute torrent of hate that comes at you is so intense."
I know. I mean, I admit that my brain is wired in such a way. I guess I'm just sort of numb, or I don't experience human emotion like most people, and so I can withstand it. But I don't encourage that among others who have a more kind of reasonable way that they approach like life and relationships and whatnot.
I get upset, so I don't really read comments. But when on the occasions that I do, people accuse me of like being a self-promoter for being like, taking the Palestinian side. I'm like, do you understand how much it's cost me to take the Palestinian side?
Well, I get called a trans. Like, oh, you're trans. Like, at least twice a day. I'm like, my sister's like, that makes me so mad. I'm like, I don't know. I think it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I think they just think it's a big insult.
It's so weird. It's not. It's just. But again, so the idea that somebody would accuse you of, like, again, being a pedo is like, that actually makes me really angry. And so.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. But there's also like no other cynical ulterior motive where I'm trying to like connive to somehow get in the good graces of Barry Weiss or anything like that.
Well, I certainly hope not. If you are on the pages of the Free Press, though, I'm going to drag your ass from one.
I mean, I'll tell you right now, if the Free Press asks me to write something and they don't exert any control over what I can write, and it's something that I would write anyway in any forum, I would consider doing it. I've written for publications across the political spectrum, but I wouldn't become like in.
But don't you think it's weird that if they would come to you, all right, on something like this, because that's my thing.
I don't know that they haven't.
Came to you because you pushed, because you take a position that the only reason he wanted you is because you gave credibility to an idea that he already wanted to push, was that Epstein had no connection to Israel. That's near and dear to his heart. He wants to disprove the idea.
We went through the Ehud Barak thing, or I've gone through it, I think, on Ben Shapiro's show and other places, so I don't claim that he had no connection whatsoever to anybody associated with Israel. That's not correct.
No connection to the state of Israel. That's the thing. If
he had a connection to a former prime minister who, when he had been prime minister, oversaw the Israeli intelligence services.
Well, he was.
Is that a connection to the Israeli state? I think possibly. So I acknowledge that.
I know you gotta go, Jenin.
But I mean,
it's okay.
But I can't be responsible for whatever might have motivated somebody to invite me on a show. People used to make variations of this charge all the time when I would be a semi-regular guest on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox. Don't you understand that he's only inviting you on for this cynical reason, and he's using you, or he's trying to use you? He's like a prop of using you as a prop to push some agenda. I'm saying, I don't know, possibly, maybe, but all I can control is what I say, and what I say on any possible venue that I'm invited on. So anything that I said on Tucker Carlson, I would say on the Left Wing podcast that I have been on. It's the same is true now. Anything I've said on Ben Shapiro, I've said on any number of other places that wanted me to come on across the political spectrum. So that's all I can really control. I can't control the hypothetical motives that might have enticed some host to invite me onto something. That's just not within my ambit or sphere of direct personal influence, you know?
Fair enough. I take that position mostly. I'll talk to anybody, but I also feel like if they take a heinous view on something, I'll only go on if I challenge them on that heinous view.
Ben Shapiro wasn't taking any heinous view in our
not on that topic
discussion.
But like if I were to go on the show of a white nationalist, right? Like there are lots of white nationalists or anti-Semites who purport to be pro-Palestine, because it's like, I would probably not go on their show, but I would only go on if I were to chat, even if that's not what they want, even if they wanted to talk about Palestine, I would only go on and if I could challenge their white nationalism
people would
or
always tell me that about
anti-Semitism.
Tucker. Like if I'm invited to go on Tucker and we're supposed to be talking about a certain topic, I should just totally overturn that topic and go on a rant against what we may disagree on, which I don't think is how I would approach any discussion with almost anybody.
I guess there's like, to me, it's like a matter of like, shades of things. Like if someone really has views that are just, to me, beyond the pale. Like, I don't think Tucker doesn't have views to me that are beyond the pale. Like, I disagree with him on immigration. I don't like sometimes how he talks about.
People claim he was a white nationalist, and I should therefore challenge him on white nationalism. And
but he wasn't. But there are definitely people like, what that guy Dan Blitzerin or whatever, clearly anti-Semitic, uses pro-Palestine cause as, an excuse to be anti-Semitic. Like, if he were to ask me on, I would contemplate it, but only like if I were to challenge what he says about Jews.
I guess I can,
And I guess I feel the same about Ben Shapiro, just in the context of Palestinians.
I actually think I would disagree a little bit. I think that Shapiro is more in line with Tucker in that he is very, very careful. I think that privately he probably does think the most important thing is about Palestinians. But I think as far as like he does try to preserve some sort of decorum. He's certainly not a Randy Fine by any means.
Right. Okay.
And so, I get what you're saying, and I think
we all use some discretion. Like, would I necessarily carve out hours of my day to go on some like mouth-breathing white nationalist anti-Semitic podcast? Probably not, but that's just like a matter of discretion more so than
I want to give you a lot of credit
what's
because you were one of the first people that actually gave Nick Fuentes a space to talk. I think you were hosting Glenn Greenwald. You allowed him, and of course he's been, blackballed by everything. And of course he has a lot of objectionable views to a lot of people, but he's actually, his analysis on Israel-Palestine has been very good, and I commend you for giving him that space and allowing.
I did a bit of. It was a like roughly adverse. It was like a cordial but adversarial style interview.
And
I don't agree with I think he probably would admit that he's anti-Semitic and that he does think that there's inherently corrupting qualities with Jewish influence or Judaism itself. More that.
Yeah, but you had an adult conversation
separate
with him,
and apart from Israel, and I don't agree with that outlook. So I'd be happy to challenge him on that.
But you
I
were
wouldn't
willing to have a
refrain from having him
conversation,
on.
and you're right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I will, of course, again, give you credit for that. But my skepticism, especially because I do find Richard Hanania to be objectionable on multiple
So do I
levels.
in some respects, but I still talk to him. I don't know. I just have developed a random sort of rapport with him, and we do occasional streams together. I don't know what to tell you.
I can never tell if he's trolling. Some of the things
he's always semi-trolling
are so abhorrent and just so and then of course my animosity to you also stems from the fact that you came in my mentions at some point and accused me of grifting and accused me of pushing.
I don't think I never used the word grifting. I don't use that word.
You did. In fact, I think
I accused you of
something
grifting?
bad should happen to me
No, I don't.
That I should.
I highly doubt that. I mean, show me the quote.
Yeah.
I can't imagine I said that. I don't accuse people of grifting because I've been the recipient of that spurious accusation too many times, and I know how it's misused. So I can't imagine I use that against you. I'm not sure what incident you're referring to, but if you pull it up, I'm sure I could explain it.
Yeah.
I remember criticizing you the night that Israel launched the preemptive strike against Iran, just because I thought that you were doing this whole routine where like you're anti-Israel, but you're also like pro-Trump, and it just would like totally devolved into incoherence.
But no, she's criticized Trump very vehemently.
I was responding to something like where
you
said something like Israel must have betrayed Trump, so Trump should cut off Israel, as though Trump wasn't colluding the whole way through with Israel and doing this ruse of Iran negotiations.
Let me get this straight. Trump set up nuclear talks for Sunday, and Israel just said, "F your talks, we do what we want," and bombed Iran. If Trump doesn't cut off all ties and leave them to fend for themselves, his legacy and reputation are done. This was a slap in the face.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair statement.
That.
You said, I'm sure this depiction of events is totally correct, and Trump will be cutting all ties with Israel. Also, by coincidence, today I had a lobotomy. Okay?
Yeah, because
and then you said, hold up.
See,
then
you
said
said because it's a funny comment.
Online Trump voters like yourself constantly try to conjure narratives of some illusionary conflict or rift between Trump and Israel deserve a lot more cynical snark. Okay?
Exactly. I agree.
No, this is the thing.
You were trying to set up Israel and Trump as antagonists, meaning Israel is somehow acting contrary to Trump's interests.
This is what's in front of us. This is what we know. Again, because you're
inferring
that there's always this secret behind the deal, and look at all these things. I think it's funny because on the surface, all right, we have the Trump administration engaging in what we all think are good faith talks with the country of Iran.
I didn't. I said it contemporaneously. If you look into the details of
Michael does not think they were. He never thought they were.
But literally, the country of Iran thought that they were. Okay.
Well, no, they were increasingly doubtful that they were good faith, but they continued to participate.
No, they did think that. Why would you participate if you thought it was a total setup?
I mean, the foreign minister, in the weeks leading up to the preemptive strike, would say, "Why is it that Mr. Witkoff is saying something that seems totally contradictory to what he was saying in the negotiations?" Because they were pretextual. They were in concert with Israel. Netanyahu came to the White House. Trump told him, "We're going to do these Iran negotiations. They're going to be predicated on the Libya model."
You guys, we were going to end on a conciliatory note about this.
My problem at the time was that you were still trying to perpetuate this idea that Trump and Israel were at loggerheads because you need to separate them somehow.
I didn't. I literally didn't.
You don't like Israel, but you want to rationalize support of Trump.
No,
and it just became radically untenable. And yeah, I did make an especially snarky remark because when a war was launched, and I see what I believe to be totally incorrect analysis proliferating. I mean, you weren't alone that night. So many people, including like Sagar from Breaking Points, and all kinds of people were saying, Israel must have betrayed Trump. Trump can't stand for this. That proved to be totally incorrect, right? They were
if he doesn't do this, then the jig is up, and clearly he didn't. So the jig was up, and I have never once wavered from that. I have called him out every freaking day since then. All right, and in fact, he is not the peace president. And I know you think that that's silly, but at the same time,
no,
she
has. I think
that they were engaging in good faith, and they clearly
I think Mel also.
It's not good faith. Sorry, Jenin, but it's not good faith to give an ultimatum to Iran saying within 60 days you must agree to dismantle your entire nuclear facility.
It's Taco. All right, just like in 10 days he's going to tell Russia
you must submit. You must
this,
capitulate to these maximalist demands that we know no Iranian government could ever accept because it would be a national humiliation. That's not a good faith negotiation.
Okay.
That's a
I think Mel can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she thinks reasonably that influencers like her, and probably not me, can actually have an influence on Trump. So flattering him to some degree could, if a lot of us do it.
It's not even that. It's that you can encourage right-wing people to think, hey, do you look at this woman. She's right-wing. She's a Trump supporter. She's not a Trump hater. She doesn't habitually shit on Trump every single day. And yet she thinks that Israel's is wrong. She thinks they're a bad influence on Trump. She's anti-Israel. She's pro this Palestine. So hey, I can align with her, and I do think that you can build up a coalition of people who say, hey, there are people who think like me, who they're not okay with this kind of subservience to the state of Israel by the Republican Party, and you can start to build a wedge. I mean, we've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, who
how has that worked
saw
so far?
That coming. Oh, I'm sorry.
I guess pumping out like wish casting to persuade others.
I know you're a contrarian,
if it entails,
everything just sucks except for
entails promulgating fictitious depictions of what's going on politically, then I just object to it. From whatever
I feel like I know what it's like to be a couples therapist now.
Well, I just think that you're in a peculiar position. And you're like a lot of people on the internet where you voted for Trump, you advocated for Trump, but you're also increasingly critical of Israel, anti-Israel, and you have to constantly jump through hoops to rationalize how that position can cohere into something.
Never do that.
No, she doesn't. She criticizes him constantly.
I know, I get it, but I was just saying to posit that night that Israel acted against the interest of Trump when they were working in cahoots with one another. And Trump was actively facilitating the Iranian bombing campaign that he would later join.
I quite literally had a crash out for like 3 days, okay? And I have not let up on him for one single second.
I gotcha. I'm just saying that statement that night that you sent it was just not a correct characterization of what was going on.
Okay, well, you know what? Sometimes I can be snarky too, which is why you got that screenshot. Which I did the screenshot because it included the whole thing, and I wanted people to see the whole picture. And sometimes,
that's fine. And then people send me screenshots that otherwise I wouldn't get as notifications. And then I see them.
That's what happens to me. All these people I've muted, I'm like, because they annoy me too much. Someone sends me a screenshot. I'm like, I didn't want to see that about what they've said about me.
I mean, Jenin and I had this discussion or debate, going back months, where I was supposed to be like repentant and admitting that I was catastrophically wrong about Trump and Israel and who.
I never,
not you specifically, but a lot of people.
Because I also know it takes time. I don't know if it would have been worse or not.
Okay.
Anyway,
I'm
being annoyed by this, like these people on the internet who are constantly trying to tell me that Trump is secretly anti-Israel, or like voting for Trump was the more Israel-critical thing to do. And I just think I was all throughout 2024. I was having like literal debates like this about this with some people who, when he bombed Iran, said, "Oh my God, we were betrayed." As if like it was totally unforeseeable, and it was actually eminently foreseeable if you weren't blinded by this weird prism you're looking at things through. Because you rationalize being really Israel critical and also pro-Trump, which does not add up to any coherent whole, and never did in my estimation.
I disagree that I think that it was foreseeable, because the simple fact, if we had gone in and gone to war, perhaps you could definitely say that, but the fact is that it was just a really stupid military operation that, to my knowledge, didn't actually accomplish anything.
Trump called for Israel to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities during the campaign, so how was it not
he knew for a fact, he knew that they couldn't actually do it, all right? Everybody
it would be a
knew.
joint U.S. operation, and Trump was calling for that publicly in the campaign, so how is it not
right,
foreseeable?
But no, actually, I don't think he actually said a joint.
Of course he did. I'll send you the quotes. I can almost recite them by heart.
I absolutely remember when he said, if I was Bibi, I would go and bomb them, and I saw that as really kind of a, hey,
He called for it. People just filtered it out of
their
he absolutely range of perception because it didn't comport with the argument that they felt they had to make on the internet.
It was after Iran responded for Nasrallah's assassination. It was, I believe, early October. Trump said,
even if he didn't specifically call for it, Trump's first term was marked by ratcheting up extreme bellicosity toward Iran. So what? You think he was going to do a total 180?
Totally. No, I thought he was going to be conciliatory. All right.
Why? Based on what?
Because he understood that he couldn't get anywhere he already canceled the JCPOA. He had nowhere to go. Clearly, Iran, having built this massive kind of cooperation between China, they signed the $450 billion oil deal. They have now the transatlantic railroad running from China to Iran. They have an ability to work around U.S. sanctions, essentially, right?
Okay. I just think that was all wish casting, again, to rationalize a vote for Trump, which if you want to vote for Trump, I don't have this massive problem with. You're amongst 60 or 70 million people. I just think that
I don't shy away from the fact that I did vote for Trump.
I got it. I think Jenin did too, right?
You should.
No, I voted for Jill Stein.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I wasn't a hardcore like, oh, you should have to. I said, whoever you vote for, I understand any way, shape, or form.
No, I got you.
Totally
I just think that the attempt to reconcile voting for Trump with this like secret Israel adverse agenda was always this weird sort of routine that a lot of people on the internet in particular felt that they had to pursue, even when it passed the point of any possible coherence.
My position was more like the Democrats need to be punished because if there's any hope for change on this issue, like they cannot be rewarded for perpetuating genocide. Trump is unlikely to be that much worse. I might have been proven wrong on that one. We can never really know because we don't know what the alternative is.
Trump has no pushback at all within his coalition, essentially. So I mean,
well, he has Marjorie Taylor Greene.
He has a handful of outlier podcasters. Maybe one or two people who then get extrapolated into some like representation of MAGA. And meanwhile, I mean, people should go if they're interested. Go look. I did interviews on 4th of July at the Staten Island 4th of July parade, thinking that it was going to be
Staten Island.
Well, yeah, but it's pro-Trump, right? I mean, that's sort of the reason why I wanted to go. I wanted to ask about Trump's foreign policy, and universally, I did not cherry pick. I did not ask leading questions. Universally, they were all 100% in favor of Trump bombing Iran. Now, if you live on X and you're getting algorithmically served this like peculiar slant on Trump supporters, you might have a different view. Sorry?
Come to Fayetteville, North Carolina. This is where I live. I live in Fayetteville. Yeah. So come ask military families, because I assure you, the pushback was pretty stunning, actually. Locally,
it was never borne out in any polling data. In fact, like it was like 90+% of self-identified
because it was over in one night
supported bombing Iran.
Right.
No, even ahead of time, they supported it.
So, what do you think would have happened if Kamala had been president? You think?
I mean, it's counterfactual scenarios.
Yeah, exactly.
I did not advocate for Kamala. I didn't vote for any of them. I voted for Fred Flintstone. I mean, not because I'm a huge Flintstone fanatic, but like, I wanted to make critiques of why I didn't find it to be necessarily justifiable to vote for either Trump or Harris, or for that matter, the third parties who are kind of non-interested.
Did you think, though, that you have the luxury of voting in states that don't matter?
Yeah. Stein. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's a luxury that my vote doesn't count.
I think if we had to speculate, right, what Harris would have done. Look, I think probably she would have been more responsive to the Democratic coalition, which is increasingly Israel critical, perhaps, than Biden. Probably not hugely consequentially. I mean, she said during the campaign that she couldn't even think of anything she would do differently than Biden on a policy level with respect to Israel.
But Cheney on this.
That might have lost her the election.
But she wouldn't. But just the nature of the coalition that she would have been responsive to is different than the Republican coalition to which Trump is responsive, which exerts no incentive on him whatsoever to do anything differently on Gaza. In fact, has encouraged him or incentivized him to double down with the declaration that the U.S. is going to take over Gaza, expediting munitions, all this. And now,
and when it comes to the West Bank, it's much worse because they're with the separate sanctions.
What penalty has Trump played politically for his Israel policy? None.
Yeah. What we've seen with the Epstein files is that a significant portion of his influencers, of his kind of I don't want to say fixers, but people who kind of corral the base online, is they'll do and say anything they're told to do. Right? Yeah. I mean, they are totally.
Charlie Kirk is just an apparatus, literally.
Yeah, I mean, he is quite literally a giant thing of Play-Doh. That they just mold into whatever they need on whatever given day. They have no opinions for themselves, and I mean they've proven to be just kind of really shameless in their servitude to this not party, but to this one particular politician. Which
I agree.
I
just think that the influence, like the impact or the significance of the influencers, is overstated. I mean, there's too many trend pieces written or too many unfounded extrapolations made about the sentiment of MAGA or what's going on within MAGA based on a handful of podcasters and influencers. It's just not representative. It reminds me of when like Democrats on the left used to way over-interpret social media in terms of the predilections of the wider Democratic Party base. I mean, I think people get way too narrowly, myopically focused on that as a meaningful harbinger of how the broader electorate will react to anything.
I would definitely disagree with that, in that, at least when it comes to Trump. Now, I think all other politicians, you're probably correct. They are more susceptible. They're kind of just their bases, their support, all fall in line with traditional party support. But as far as Trump goes, he does have this very unique base that is highly susceptible to online presence. He is extremely online, even though he's like 80 years old. In this, I think it's like his heart is online, and yet he doesn't seem to have, I don't know if it's the intestinal fortitude, I don't know if it's just the sheer will to follow through.
He's being blackmailed by the Epstein.
I don't even think it's that. I think maybe he might probably.
Oh, so Trump's the one guy who's not being sexually blackmailed, even though he had this 15-year relationship with Epstein?
Here's what I think.
Wow. Explain to me, how is Trump the one guy who's not implicated in the sexual blackmail ring, despite partying with Epstein with young models for 15 years?
No, I'm saying
you said, no, it's all these of-age girls on the island. But I actually
I'm not arguing in favor of the existence of a sexual blackmail operation. You are. So how is it that Trump is the only major figure who is exempted from being implicated by this?
And here's the other thing that comes down on the Epstein. Why is it that it's only sex that has to be involved? Why can't there be financial scandal involved? Why is it always only have to be? That's something that I take issue with, because you've got this man again who we don't know where his freaking money came from. We do know. I know someone posted some clips from Badley Edwards' book, which I haven't. Is actually what spurred me to get this book, in which this man was apparently some kind of quote unquote wolf of Wall Street, in the essence that he was like a bear of Wall Street, and that he could just walk into these executives, these hedge fund executives' offices, and demand they send money here and there. We've got multiple testimony from witnesses, bodyguards, and whatnot. One of them in particular, in which he demanded that you need to get that money to Israel immediately, like fucking yesterday. As the story was relayed to me, the man on the receiving end of Epstein's demand was shaking. The man was another Wall Street billionaire who made his own rules. With his voice quivering, he responded to Epstein saying, "I wired $30 million today. It's already there. You can check." You know,
that sounds vaguely familiar. I mean, I would have to look at it to see exactly what you're referring to. But okay, sure. I mean, if you're sick and tired of everybody fixating on the sexual dimension,
I'm not sick and tired.
More power
I just think
to
that there are more dimensions to this.
If you think that the Epstein matter is a matter primarily characterized by financial improprieties, and we should get to the bottom of that, I just don't think that is the reason why people are so
Are you familiar with the Bobby
by
Baker
this
case? Are you familiar with
case?
Bobby Baker? Bobby Baker.
Bobby Baker?
Yes, so he was the quote-unquote fixer, Soviet fixer. He was the chief of staff for Lyndon B. Johnson when he was in the Senate. And then he moved on. He was some kind of lobbyist, in which he used...
Oh, okay, that does sound more familiar now, yeah.
Right, so you go read the Bobby Baker case.
And then he died under suspicious circumstances, right?
He made it through his 64 hearing, and he never actually brought anyone down, but he worked on multiple levels. So he worked as a lobbyist again, and he also curated girls. He was, of course, kind of like a pimp for JFK. That's what we know. We also know that he was involved with all of these lucrative contracts in vending machines for senators and stuff like that, making millions of dollars in 2025 dollars at the time. And so it's not like this Epstein thing is anything new. It's not out of the realm of possibilities. Bobby Baker, basically, from what has been told, essentially controlled all of Washington. All right. He was able to procure several very, very suspicious, very corrupt military contracts. One of them was for one of first, I think it's the F9, I believe it was, $7 billion at the time. Again, it's not like when we say that this happened, it's because it's happened before.
I mean, I would have to look into the Bobby Baker thing in more detail. I don't have extensive familiarity with it. So.
Yeah, so again, there you go. That's a positive note to lean on. Everybody should go read about Bobby Baker.
We can continue with Bobby Baker in a few weeks. We're almost hitting the 2-hour mark.
Yeah. I know. So will the summer of Epstein be still in full full effect in a few weeks? I guess we'll have to see. I hope so.
Oh, people move on.
People always
so
say that I'm
fast.
telling them to forget about Epstein or ignore Epstein or not care about Epstein. I'm saying, no, join me in the rabbit hole. I'm enjoying it.
Oh, well, hopefully we'll solve the mystery before the summer's up. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your contrarian takes and hope to have you back soon.